As mentioned, my name is Ombretta Agró Andruff. I am a freelance curator by trade and a climate activist by passion. I'm Italian originally, but I've been based out of Miami for the past 8 years. And I've co-founded and direct a residency and research program for artists called ArtSale, where we bring together artists and cultural producers along with scientists, marine experts, and climate activists to investigate how climate change and man-made pollution are impacting the waterways surrounding Miami and South Florida. And the idea is to create artwork that we can all use to leverage for advocacy and really bring communities from climate awareness to climate action. And I'm here today to moderate this exciting panel discussion about tools for sustainable curating. So I'm sure I'm not the only one to agree and think that 2020 will be remembered as a year of unprecedented for the entire planet. And yet witnessing how local communities came together to support those on the front lines and examples of international collaborations to fight one common enemy instilled some hope in those of us who have been advocating for the same level of global mobilization to combat another lingering existential crisis, and that is the climate emergency. Many of us took this moment of forced pause in action to rethink and reassess our ways of making culture. For this 2020 IKT virtual meeting, as Julia and Alfredo mentioned, we really wanted to take advantage of this collective knowledge to share stories, experiences, and best practices developed over the past few months, as well as explore sustainable methods in our curatorial endeavors. And with this in mind, we reached out to our three fantastic panelists who are joining us today to ask them to share some of the most recent projects and offer us thoughts and tools that might help us as curators and help our institutions to become greener and effectively reduce our collective carbon footprint. As the first curator ever dedicated to ecology at an art institution, Lucia Pietroiusti has been advocating for years for institutions to act more as permaculture than monoculture. In her own words, an institution that works in a very embedded way, that thinks about the land it is sitting on, is an ecological institution. I hope that institutions become less hierarchical, more collaborative, and inter-organizational. Those are forms of environmental thinking. Amongst her many projects, we will hear about Back to Earth, the Serpentine Gallery's multi-year undertaking, inviting artists, architects, poets, filmmakers, scientists, thinkers, and designers to devise artist-led campaigns, protocols, and initiatives responding to the environmental crisis. From Back to Earth, we'll move to Down to Earth, the unplugged exhibition curated by Thomas Oberender this summer at the Gropiusbau in Berlin. Instead of making another exhibition with artistic positions on climate change, Thomas says about his project, we want to reveal and partially change the operating system of exhibition making, and he will tell us how. And last but not least, we'll hear from Farid Rakun, a member of the Indonesian collective Ruang Grupa, who will touch upon their plans for the 15th edition of Documenta, which they will be curating to be held in 2022. And really thinking and looking at sustainability in the context of social practices, highlighting collective values such as equality, sharing, solidarity, friendship, and togetherness. Now, I don't want to bore you by reading our panelists' long and really impressive resumes. I will ask them to share a brief introduction about themselves before sharing their 10 minutes PowerPoint presentation. At the end of the three presentations, we will engage in a short inter-panel discussion and then open up the room for Q&A with the audience. I encourage everyone to write their questions in the chat during the talk so that we are ready for a dynamic discussion. Thank you all. Thank you again for our three panelists for joining us. And Lucia, now the floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you so much, Ombretta, for that introduction. All of the words that you have put to what I do, I don't deserve, but I'm grateful for. I wanted to thank you and Julia and Alfredo and the tech team, and particularly Florian, who trained me, first and foremost, and obviously you all for having joined. So I might start with an introduction by way of an apology, and as much as first curator ever in the world to be dedicated to ecology might be a big overstatement, because of course, from the history of artists being profoundly committed to the environment and ecology, to the history of institutions being committed to things like art and science, to the emergence of, say, curatorial collectives, such as, for example, Ruangrupa, to the history of socially engaged practice, all of those things are elements and have elements of environmental and ecological kind of thinking behind them. What I tried to do within the Serpentine Galleries in London, where I work, was to write a project called General Ecology and then push for that project to become a structural element within the Serpentine's kind of activities. And to do that, the simplest way was to go, okay, can I please change my job title to Curator of General Ecology? And that's, you know, partly because it sounds kind of cool and weird and you get to start conversations with people, and partly in the hope that given that small structural transformation, that then one would be able to, you know, in the kind of slow and bureaucratic machine that is an art organization or any institution in general, one would be able to then slowly, you know, generate a budget for something like a general ecology project. And then once that budget is fundraised for, which I did quite some work towards over the last few years, then you know, maybe open it up into more of a department. And by the time you've done that, then you have a department dedicated to ecology within an art organization. So I'm just going to share with you, hopefully, a screen, which I will try and do in just 1 second. I think that unfortunately, yes, here we go. I will share with you just some images, which I'm actually just going to show you here because I fear that if I go full screen, you might not see them. But please, someone step in and yell at me if you can't see them. These are some of the images of the activities from the General Ecology Project. So as I mentioned, the General Ecology Project is a project that is about maybe 3 years old, but it has tendrils back in the past from the long-standing work that we had undertaken with the artist Gustav Metzger, to a festival on the topic of extinction, the Extinction Marathon that we'd worked on in 2014, to a number of other things. So definitely not emerging out of nowhere. Nothing ever does. But it was conceived as a project that would work a little bit like tree structure. So on the visible side, above ground, you would have a series of programs and projects and initiatives that would directly address themes around more than human worldings and ways of thinking, and environmental balance, climate justice, climate science, I suppose, and the climate emergency, and so on. And then under the ground, it would have a root system that would simultaneously work on organizational ecology, organizational structure, interdisciplinary work, interdepartmental work within the Serpentine's infrastructure, the way that we relate to each other as an organization and within it. So looking at these two sort of things happening together and emerging out of the programmatic or the curatorial, you'll find a slight difference from the, hopefully, from the usual institutional separation that has on one side buildings and what's called sustainability and resilience, and on the other side curatorial programming and subject matter. So the attempt was to kind of try and work on those two things at the same time. And I should say something which is perhaps more important even than that, which is that there are 3 strands that are long-term research-based, that work on the basis of embeddedness and long duration, and that aren't centered on the notion of an exhibition being the kind of end point, or on the idea of, like, say, footfall into a building. And those three strands are here. You can see the General Ecology project being only one of these three. Learn being more of the civic and social justice end work. And I have to say that that is 15 years old. I think about 15 years old or even more. And then arts and technologies, which looks at placing artists within the kind of machinery of advanced technologies, in order to also have to a certain extent, a say in the matter while these systems begin to determine us too. So that's the job at the Serpentine. It also, I need to say that it emerges very strongly out of the fact that before having that job title, I was curator of public programs, live and public programs, which means that I was already primed to work with across disciplines in an artist-led but across disciplines kind of way, and that I already had some kind of already curatorial agency within the organization. So nothing is born from nothing, and it began by literally sort of squirreling away some of the budget of the live and public programs, then starting to do live and public programs that had kind of obsessively to do with the environment, and then slowly kind of building out from there. The other job that I did around 2018, 2019, whilst all of this was going on, was the Lithuanian Pavilion. This was an independent project, the Lithuanian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. And now a cliche to say that nobody could have expected that it would have been received that positively is really honest, but an honest comment that I would love to sort of for it to come across as honest. But I think one of there's a root system to this project too, because one of the things that it made us realize quite clearly was that there was really a kind of there was a sort of readiness and a willingness to address the subject of climate change within the art environment, and that discourse accelerated quite quickly during 2019. And the sort of root system of this work, which I don't think is part of the main public narrative of the work, which is about, I think, everybody coming in and crying. I think in the root system of this work, we had been thinking a little bit about where we were sited and how we were going to work in this kind of ecological way with the space in which we were. So, for instance, the pavilion opened a building that is sited in military zone in Venice. There's the Marina Militare, the kind of ship, I don't even know, the marine end of the military in Italy has a base in Venice, and this building was in a zone that was restricted for decades. And so by opening this space to a certain extent, and I kind of love to think of this, we sort of did this like tiny, I don't know, like counter military like intervention in bikinis, which in the end was symbolically really interesting, because you had these colonels in uniforms walking in one direction and then people in bathing suits walking in the other direction, and we caused them all kinds of trouble, and the negotiation between us was actually quite tense. There's a few other elements. For example, we screen printed the catalog with a cooperative run by inmates in the male prisons of Santa Maria Maggiore in Venice. And then later on, we worked with the mayor to redistribute the sand and create new playgrounds for kids in a city like Venice that is kind of infamously terrible to bring children at, as was the experience of the artists and I, because we were a team of 5 women with a combined sum total of 7 children making this work between the ages of 2.5 and 7. Anyways, back to the General Ecology project. One of the more public, let's say, manifestations of the project is a festival series called The Shape of a Circle in the Mind of a Fish, that the writer and editor Filipa Ramos and I have been curating again since 2018. And to say this kind of sort of parasitical nature of the General Ecology project, even within its own kind of logic, institutional logic, is maybe important because what we did when we had the first event at the London Zoo, so the photo that you see in the center at the bottom is one of them. That's Claire Filmont performing a Simone Forti choreography in the reptile house of the London Zoo. What we did at that event is to kind of say, the shape of a circle in the mind of a fish is part of the general ecology project. The project didn't exist at all, but it was kind of one of those ways of, I suppose, Trojan horsing an environmental project within an institution. And if the idea was to, let's say, infect, which is, I need to really stop saying that because infection in 2020 is really not a good thing, but to kind of influence an entire organization towards the environmental, then what the General Ecology Project has been doing is to sort of slowly put in a few building blocks, both in a visible way and in a non-visible way, to do that. So I'm just going to show you some images from some other activities that we did. But I think the key point here was that we then had to think really deeply about learnings. So if you immerse yourself in environmental and ecological, and particularly more than human thinking, you quite quickly get to a very sort of clear awareness of the fact that the effects of climate change are incredibly unequally distributed, that the devastation of the planet emerges from and continues to derive directly from accelerationism, consumerism, colonialism, and racism. And to sort of end that, the ongoing systemic and continuous violence against Indigenous peoples and dispossession of Indigenous peoples' lands is one of the biggest, let's say, environmental and ecological crisis of the moment. But then the problem is, once you get to that and you get really into like Indigenous wisdom traditions and forms of animism and the fact that these are knowledges that are tens of thousands of years old, how can you avoid, and this is a question I genuinely ask myself, I mean, as a white Western woman, how do you avoid doing to knowledge, and knowledge forms the world round, the same thing that is done to mountains and lands, and which is extraction, right? And this is a question that I have absolutely no answer for, and I think it's right that I should never fully do. But one of the projects that we've been working on recently, Back to Earth, is a project that at least tries to follow the thread all the way through. So not stop at the level of, okay, there's this great learning about plants having consciousness, but actually going, well, what are the political and geopolitical issues that, if you follow that line all the way through, what are the geopolitical issues that are at play here? And how do you leverage whatever you've got as an institution with your network? Like, how do you use all of it to kind of towards that, or like with that in mind? So we developed for about a year, and I will speed up and be quite swift with this, but we developed a project called Back to Earth, which invites 65 artists to develop artworks that are simultaneously an environmental campaign or an initiative. And we're kind of mapping these campaigns, you see the dots, these campaigns and these artworks on something that could look a little bit like this, which is on a continuum between visibility, very kind of spectacular projects that that are, maybe performative or immersive or whatever, spectacular project, to transformation, invisible projects that make some kind of change to, say, policy or curriculum and so on. From what do they ask of the audience, from awareness on one end all the way through to participation, getting involved. So by mapping it like this, we're sort of also allowing, I mean, it's not our place to allow, but let's say allowing ourselves to work on all of the different forms. So instead of picking a position, as it were, between anti-aesthetics and high aesthetics, or whatever you want to call them, I don't even know what that means, but instead of picking a position between different forms of response or solution, have a relative amount of experimentation around just putting everything out there, just trying everything out, with the assumption that, given that the climate catastrophe maps itself onto the infinite complexity of the world itself, there isn't such a thing as some, one-stop solution for climate change. I think we all just need to make peace with that. But so the projects, these slides are a few of the projects that are in the Back to Earth, let's say, infrastructure. Back to Earth has now become a multi-year project. It was supposed to manifest as online, off-site, on-site, live, exhibition-based, process-based artworks for 2020, and the coronavirus outbreak has, to a certain extent, slowed us down and allowed us to really focus on about 25 of them and really think more deeply about forms of impact, forms of collaboration with non-art organizations that might allow us to sort of get further into the potential impact of something like an artwork that is also a campaign, as it were. I'm mentioning, so I won't pause so much on these, but just to say that if you imagine that map again, there are some online campaigns like Olafur Eliasson's one, which are really on the kind of visibility and awareness end of that map. And then other initiatives like Carolina Caicedo's, which are really working deeply with lawyers to think about the personhood of rivers and a just and fair energy transition, for example. So
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We got a couple of minutes to go.
Yes, but amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ombretta. I actually forgot to put on a timer. So we are trying to not just do this thing, but actually think this thing through and turn it into a possible kind of repeatable and multipliable prototype, as in prototype attempt methodology, for it to be able to be, transformed and taken up. Like, we're kind of open sourcing the whole thing, and one of the ways that we've been doing that has been to just think as we do through something like the podcast. And whilst we thought that an 8-episode series was going to be enough to do this, we actually just scratched the surface of 2 or 3 ideas that sort of drive us. In the meantime, the General Ecology Project is also transitioning to become the General Ecology Network, which looks at formalizing a little bit those kind of skills exchanges that we've been undertaking for a few years with art and, crucially, non-art organizations, from NGOs to, impact production people, to lawyers, to educational institution, and so on, with the aim of really thinking about getting artists right in the center of systems change, creating and platforming and particularly supporting strategies for the intersection of art and ecology, and again, continuing to prototype some resilient and sustainable futures for the arts. And I think I really want to pause on the idea of resilience, not pause, but really speed through the idea of resilience and sustainability, that when it's in, I think it's really important to note, when the words resilience and sustainability are in the vocabulary of the business plans of institutions, if one is very actually cautious as to what it means, you realize that it actually means the resilience and the sustainability of the institution itself. And so I think it's really important to think of these structures as structures that also have a tendency to protect themselves and to protect the way in which they are run and the way in which they kind of reproduce themselves in the future, and to try and very kind of cautiously, I would say, like generously and kindly, like tweak it until it sort of eventually, looking back, doesn't quite recognize itself, for the better, I hope. So thank you.
Right, thank you, Roland, and all the technical supporters. I hope to manage it. As you know, we created a show in this summer. It's a real summer project with a title Down to Earth. And I will switch to a PowerPoint presentation. Maybe some words about my background. The work I started in the field of curating started already in the theater world. So I was a playwright and a dramaturg, and so this perspective is still very useful and important for my work. Some years ago, I started to work as the artistic director of the Berliner Festspiele, including our theater hall, Haus der Berliner Festspiele, and also our exhibition hall, Gropiusbau. And I'm working with a big group of very high professional, interesting curators. And in 2016, we started a program that is called Immersion. It's not, I would say it's quite different understanding of the term immersion. It's not about shaking walls or only virtual reality experiences. It's about the philosophical understanding of what it means. What it means to go over borders, to enter space, and to have relations that are not longer in opposite of something, to start a kind of being embedded work or experience. So that is the background of also Down to Earth as a project. And now I try to switch to my presentation. I think you can see we are a group of curators. It's not my project. I'm the artistical director of this immersion program also, but it was a huge group of people who worked on this project. And very important that we are curators from different fields. So very important was the work of Tino Segal as an artist who started to work this sustainable kind of production and rethinking of the tasks of institutions started really decades before, and he was very influential and important for the concept, but also Jeroen Westele and Julia Badaljan and Anja.
Thomas, apologies for interrupting you. We're not seeing your screen.
You're not seeing my screen? Okay.
No, do you see an icon with the screen at the bottom of your computer? Because that's what you need to check. Click
You're
on
absolutely
that.
right.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you. Perfect. I'm going to leave you now. Thank you so much. Yes.
Do you see it now?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
It's fine? Okay. Yeah. So I'll go back. You see all the curators I was working with. It was more than an exhibition. I would say it's the double intensity of our festival Theatertreffen and a huge ground floor exhibition in the same time. And it was a project that was embedded also in the history of our institution. The artistic director I'm working with of the Gropiusbau, Stefanie Rosenthal, established in the very beginning of her work for the Gropiusbau a program that is deeply interested in questions and practices of sustainability. And also in her program, it was very close to the intentions of our immersion program in this period, in which we started to understand that the biggest immersive system on Earth is the climate. It's impossible to stand in opposite to this system. We influence the climate and the climate influences us. So in this situation of constantly feedback, we have to rethink our position as humans regarding to other stakeholders like animals, like plants, like all this other beings who are alive in the system. And so this was close to Stefanie's work. We also are since 2013 part of a European initiative I really recommend. We can do that all. It's called EMAS, and it's a very good tool to recreate and to check your own institution and practice in the everyday level. And it starts with a kind of research of all the things you use and how you can make it better. And then, of course, it's our program Immersion, in which we think about border dissolving processes in the arts, but not only in the arts, also in different alternative kinds of knowledge, of cultures, of political systems, and so we created 6 exhibitions from this perspective. Very interesting for our project was that we started to think about the exhibition as a kind of organism. So there have been more than 2,000 women and male artists in this project. We started the preparation 1.5 years ago. So it was not a Corona project, but Corona helped us to give a much better understanding of the problem in our institution, but also for the audience, for the public. This was, and of course, it was challenging to rebuild the whole concept under the conditions of Corona. But I think we found a way to make it more interesting for the audience than less interesting, because we started to build this organism by using small cells. So the entire exhibition concept was modular. And the 3 modules are, of course, an exhibition trail. The whole ground floor of the Gropiusbau was a huge exhibition with contemporary and not only contemporary positions regarding this questioning of climate change, our position as humans on Earth, the impact of our way of life. And you see the list of some of the artists we used to work with. You see the social modules basically have been 2 academies. We invited one from Athens and one from Paris. In Paris, it was the academy that Bruno Latour himself was founding some years ago. And from Athens, we invited Julia Strauss and her Autonomous Academy. It's a wild project. It's a activist project, and it's a worldwide network. And then, of course, we made a expert program with pioneers of alternative practices. So this have been about 40 experts from various fields. And the 3rd module was the performative module. So you see the exhibition was much more than only an exhibition. This is an exhibition view with copies of works of Andreas Gurski and Kirsten Pierrot. So to make a change in the way we produce exhibitions, we made 3 decisions. One was no flights for the preparation, and without one exception, Corona influence, everybody, every artist, every curator followed this rule, and it was really no problem. It was very surprising for me, but it was no problem. Second decision was, because it was planned for the summer, let's stop using electricity for making the exhibition. And so this changed a lot of, this had a huge curatorial impact, of course, because people who made films started now to transfer the film story into another kind of narration or medium. This was beautiful, and all the artists, I would say, really followed this way with pleasure. And the 3rd decision was that we made a research about this, let's say, how we, what kind of electricity, what kind of climate system, or what kind of electricity of photovoltaic installation we use in our building, and how can we use it better, and how much of electricity and other things like paper and water and much more do we use to make an exhibition, and to publish this use, the numbers of everything was also part of the program. You see, we invited Anna Duki Jordan, for example, to reuse tables we had to make a new work out of it. in the center of it all was a book by Bruno Latour that was very influential for us. And we loved the double meaning of the German understanding of his title. It means, of course, down to earth as a philosophical concept, but in the everyday language, it means also a way of life that is rooted, that is stable. It's connotated with, let's say, our expectation of humor or inner stability of the person. And so we invited him in his exhibition, give him space for his academy. A whole huge room was dedicated to his students and their encounter with our visitors. And the same was with the Academy of Julia Strauss. Here you can see, I hope you can see, the recycling and the way how we used material. Some examples, I'm sorry, I wrote it down, but you see, very important, for example, only one color, black. But what kind of black? We used an ink that was made from seaweed. So we asked the printer to order this very special ink that doesn't need any oil to use, and we use it for our printing. We used old material, old posters we had to make new posters and programs out of it. Yes, I think very important, you see here is a work of Azad Raza, in which we bring that soil back to life by cultivating it during some simple methods by people who are working constantly there for 4 weeks, who are called cultivators, and we give the soil that becomes alive again to the audience, and also in the end of the exhibition we give it back to the audience. The rules was regarding the travels was that of course it has an influence for the people we are.
So sorry to interrupt. I'll just give you a 2-minute warning. Thank you.
2 minutes warning.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Could you read it in a good way? Could you really read what's the points on the? Because I don't have to tell it if you can read it.
I can, and I'm sure if I can, I'm sure everybody can also read your screen. So no problem.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So you see, it was very influential for us, the way of transport. Also the question, what is the original of an artwork changed? Or we try to change our habit regarding this point. This is, for example, performance by François Chainot that he produced for us without, he stopped using electricity, and he used with colored light by using curtains in front of the windows on the south side of the building. So it was covered in beautiful colors without, it's only sunlight what you see. Electricity, heat, marketing, you see, it was very influential for the program, but also for the discovering of my own institution. It was the first time that I visited the roof and the cellar, and I really asked the people, the technicians, about the working of the our climate system. Of course, we didn't produce giveaways. Everything was recyclable. Very interesting. And also we invited people with a different kind of knowledge and technologies. You see a picture of a ritual from Senegal that was first time presented outside of Senegal. And it was a healing ritual in which they helped us to come over the coronavirus and the depression. So this is the most important sheet. Basically, these are my questions who came out of this project for the system in which we work. The system relevant facts, 20 degree and 50% humidity. This is an iron law, and we have to change that if it's possible regarding the material we are exhibiting. Also the questions of no animals and other living beings in museums. It's a great topic. Who are our partners? I discovered a lot of new partners in the politics. We have to question ourselves about social justice, because we produce also exclusive structures with these rules. So how can we overcome them? Yeah, you see the questions, and I think now you see me again. Thank you for your attention, and I hope it's interesting and could give you a glimpse of what we are doing.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for that exciting presentation. I so wish I had seen the exhibition in person. So this was a great way to at least experience it virtually and so much more. So I will then now welcome Farid Rakun. Thomas, you can hit the leave screen that you see on the upper right corner.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Thank you so much again, and we'll all return after for Q&A. And now it is my pleasure to welcome our last panelist, Farid Rakun from Ruang Grupa. Hello, Farid, all the way from Indonesia. Welcome, and I'm going to give the floor to you. Thank you so much again for being with us.
Thank you very much, Ombretta, and then thank you for including me in this session, because I learned a lot from both Lucia and Thomas before me. I'll try to share my screen right now. Okay. Because like this one, I'm going to introduce myself through this. Hopefully I won't go over time this way. Yeah. I'm Farid, as has been introduced. Part of Ruang Rupa. So what I'm going to present you right now, there's like a lot of illustrations made by my colleagues, because we kind of like do that a lot, like play total football in our kind of like lingo, because changing positions. So what I'm going to present is like using certain illustrations that has been created to communicate between us and our, let's say, partners or Lumbung members in our lingo again, to make, or in order, in the way to make Documenta 15. I'm part of Ruang Rupa, a group of artist collective based in Jakarta, Indonesia. So good evening to you all from here in Jakarta. And then we've been like, you know, founded in 2000. We've been kind of like went through a lot of iterations. The last one was something we called Good School, Ruang Rupa, with other collectives from Jakarta, namely Serum and Grafis Suruhara, made like, you know, established an informal educational platform on collective and ecosystem building. That's what we call it. At that moment, actually, we founded it in the end of 2018. And then at that moment, we as Ruang Rupa, as an artist collective, we were preparing ourselves to take a step back and make Good School much more in the forefront. But then maybe as history showed it, it's like the banner of Ruang Rupa proved to be still useful, because then we were doing what understood as Documenta 15. So then, unfortunately or fortunately, for better or worse, we had to use it again. But maybe the thing that I'm going to talk about right now is less about environmental sustainability, but also our understanding of sustainability as a whole wide-ranging concept. Because this is kind of like our sustainability plan anyway, before we use Lumbung, the central circle in this diagram, as like our working title for Documenta. So Good School we established is actually for our sustainability plan, how we could sustain as an artist collective founded in 2000, but then in 2020, what is actually still useful or impactful, or as a form, we felt the need to change again, because we kind of like went through different type of iterations. Lumbung is like for hope. I cannot assume that everyone knows. Lumbung is an Indonesian concept. It's not even Ruang Rupa concept. It's like understood vernacularly by Indonesians, especially those who are working in agriculture, permaculture, etc. Is directly translated is a rice barn, but it is kind of like a practice where you put a lot of like common governed resources in order for everyone to use. So it's kind of like in the middle. In this diagram, Ruang Rupa even like just like be put there because we're just like play that part. But the ecosystem needs to sustain. That's why we kind of like we're thinking of taking a step back, because it's fine for us not to sustain as Ruang Rupa, as a banner of Ruang Rupa, as an entity, as long as the ecosystem actually still sustain. Why we were thinking about education? Because at that moment we were thinking of like how we can see ourselves as a resource or a collection of resources, knowledge, history, network, space, etc., money, etc., all those kind of stuff, and how to share it even much more to our ecosystem. And this ecosystem we were thinking about is actually the ecosystem of Indonesian art and cultural scene. So not only in Java, Bandung, or Jogja, the main cities in Indonesia that actually art and culture are thriving, but other places is actually much more important. So that's why we were thinking of like maybe by turning ourselves into an educational platform, it would answer that need of how to sustain the ecosystem itself. And then the story has it, we had to think about what we would do if we could intervene in Documenta, let's say, because up until 2018, at least up until Documenta 14, in our ecosystem had not actually been touched really in any impactful way by Documenta. But if we had to think, to include or offer, actually invite Documenta to be part of our ecosystem, what could it be? So this is kind of like, hopefully you can see it. It's not that clear maybe, but we started thinking on how we can see Documenta as a collection of resources as well, and how could we use it to sustain our practice further. So it's not like Documenta 15 is the 100 days of Documenta 15 is the holy grail of what we're doing right now, but it has to actually sustain what we're doing anyway, with or without Documenta beforehand. And then it's actually kind of like, of course, then the question of that extraction, maybe what Lucia was touching upon, just like being an artist collective that has been invited or included in a lot of other events, artistic events in other contexts, we always think that is a challenge. How can we do something like that, still contribute, but not being extracted from what we're doing anyway? So we want to practice that and then ask other people that has not been touched by Documenta in a very impactful way to join the journey, let's say. So there's like a or a road to Documenta 15. There's a Documenta 15 to 100 days, what classically understood as Documenta, and then the post. The post is like it shouldn't, like the 100 days shouldn't take the main course position, but it needs to be like actually play. It is important because without it, there's no pre and post, but then it should sustain both the process before and after it, let's say. And then this is kind of like the illustration of what we understood vernacularly as the rice barn, as lumbung itself. And then we kind of like working with, first it's 9 lumbung members, or invited, what understood maybe before as invited artists, but we kind of like understood it as we want to work with them from like early on. So we built Documenta 15 together, we built the Lumbung network together, we built kind of like enrich each other, because before our ecosystem was only Indonesia mainly, but then right now we're kind of like thinking planetary. So like these things are the thing that we map up until now with the currently 9 Lumbung members, but it will grow to more or less 20 members to make Documenta 15. Hopefully it's still in 2022 if it's not postponed. We'll see, because no one can predict that one for now. And then how we play it is actually kind of like we need to build trust and affinities between us. So it's not transactional, you know, like the relation between institution, artistic director, and artistic team with the artist or other people who are working for an art event. But it's actually kind of like in the process, event making is very useful, has been very useful for us from the beginning, because it's actually kind of like how we work collectively, how we know each other, all those kind of stuff are built practically on the process of making an event. So we're doing it as well for Documenta 15 right now. And then maybe it's kind of like important as well, touching upon other things that has been touched upon by other panelists before me. It's just like we don't want to think about like again an exhibition as the main course and other things like mediation and education, publication, education part is a plug-in or a supporting role, but we want to make it much more horizontal, let's say, for the lack of better word, because I have problems with that word to begin with. But how actually we can think about all these things from the beginning instead of an afterthought, let's say, you know. So that's what we're doing right now. For better or worse, COVID-19 pandemic kind of like has hit, and then we have to change our way of working. A lot of times we actually very much dependent on face-to-face meeting, you know, like eating together, talking about things together, hanging out together, all those kind of stuff. How we can still achieve that type of achievements, but under certain circumstances. But the positive thing is kind of like what we're trying to do, as proven by the group we are in right now. It's kind of like taking more trajectories. People are more receptive on how to do things differently, because things cannot be done in an old way anymore, let's say. And then this is what we're trying to do, like also translating the triangle from the beginning, which was good schools, and then this time how to make Lumbung and Documenta 15 actually have also understanding of that. This one is a triangle on website actually. How we want to communicate through website, through what we call Teluru House. It's a space like Ruang Rupa or Good School, but tested in Kassel itself, which opened a couple of months ago, 2 months ago, with under strict protocols, of course. And then how Documenta 15 still have a website as well, and Lumbung itself also have website that can continue after the 2022, let's say, and then how it all can relate and make an ecosystem. It's a translation of an ecosystem understanding, let's say. And then I think I will close with this, the total football thing. Like what we're trying to do, if you ask me right now what Documenta 15 would look like, I would have to be honest, I don't know. I might have my own imagination, but I'm working with like other people. Even in Ruang Rupa itself, there's like another 8. With artistic team, there's another 7. So 15. And then with the Lumbung members itself, it's just like countless. And then each of us have different kind of understanding of sustainability, how to sustain our practice, also our ecosystem, how to push, because a lot of us are actually precarious in a precarious context. So that sustainability is not, of course, environment is very important because without it, we won't exist anyway. But how to use a big artistic event like Documenta actually to sustain other practices in other contexts that are actually can be understood as contemporary art as well and doing contemporary art as well, but has not been in the ecosystem of Documenta, let's say. And yeah, that's it. Hopefully we can continue talking about stuff more in the Q&A section.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Farid. And wonderful. Oh no, we lost Farid. Farid, if you hear us, please make sure there. Okay. So I see Friederike, who was in charge of collecting questions from the chat. And here's Farid. Well, first of all, thank you so much to all of you. As I said, we could probably be here for days exchanging ideas and thoughts, and your contributions were so inspirational and I think gave us so much food for thought to better our practices. So I do have a few questions, but before I go there, I wanted to ask if you guys have each other questions for each other. I would love to see if we can engage in a short intra-panel discussion, and then if not, we'll move to the Q&A with the audience. Anyone? Any taker?
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you. Both of your practices and thoughts were really inspirational. So just that.
Great.
Thank you. Same way for me.
I learned a lot, as I said.
Farid, how did you or how do you plan to manage that you need such a it's so important to have the contact to the communities of all these people you want to bring into the project. So how do you find the contact to the communities? Or I think it's a very good concept, and I'm absolutely curious how you do that. But my experience was that communication was, let's say, half of the time with all the people you want to create this exceptional situation. Do you have a special advice for us how we can do it in a good way?
I don't think I have any advice, Thomas. Thanks for the question. But like, as you also said in your presentation, you know, like scale is one, you know, like how you actually be, if you want to be kind of like consequential, following the thoughts, following the consequence of your logic of thinking, no, like then certain thing of like, you need to keep your scale down maybe, you know? Mm-hmm. So, which is kind of like, you've shown extremely in an extreme way actually in your project. But for us, it's like the humility of like from the beginning, we know that we won't be able to know everything, especially like, you know, but this is the way for us. For example, being an Indonesian passport holder, it's kind of like almost impossible for us to know actually what is happening in Palestine because we cannot travel there. This opportunity is kind of like push us and then make us realize that it's possible to make. We had connections, friends, etc. before meeting in Europe usually, but like how actually we can understand that much more deeper because we have the time now. It's not like we relatively longer than usual, you know, like to work on this. So we are in a very deep dependency towards, you know, the people we've met and then decided to meet, to work together. We might not be able to know exactly what's happening in different local contexts, but that's why we started with working with people that we know already kind of well, you know, like better than just like a total stranger, let's say.
Great. Thank you so much, Farid, for that. I know we have a few questions from the audience, so I will ask Friederike, who's been keeping an eye on the chat, to ask those if they are to the specific panelist or if they're general, and then we'll have about 5 or 6 minutes for that, and then unfortunately we'll have to come to a close. Thank you, Frida.
Sorry, Frida, yeah, sorry.
Don't hear you. Okay. I am not hearing Frida. Are you guys hearing Friederike? No. Friederike, we're not hearing you. Still not. Okay, so you can either write it in the chat or yes. Okay, so Frida is going to write the question in the chat. In the meantime, I have a question for all of you, and we'll see. It may take us over time, but I will ask, and then if we get the question from the audience, we'll give priority. But this is something I asked also yesterday to our keynote speaker, and that is a quote and thoughts from American author Jonathan Franzen, who I think many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with. And who really thinks about the apocalypse is coming and that we better prepare for it. So this is a quote from an essay that he wrote last year, has now been turned into a book, where he says, if you care about the planet and about the people and animals who live on it, there are two ways to think about this. You can keep on hoping that catastrophe is preventable and feel even more frustrated or enraged by the words in action, or you can accept that a disaster is coming and begin to rethink what it means to have hope. So it's really about adapting to disaster versus trying to prevent it because the train is coming and we don't have the ability to stop it anymore. I'd love for you to comment on this briefly if you can. Anyone?
I mean, I would start from the position that disaster is already here. And if you ask people who have been working in decolonial and anti-colonial contexts, they'll tell you that the disaster has been here for 500 years. So in terms of adaptation or, I mean, certainly giving up and nihilism is absolutely not an option anywhere. The opposite of that is not some kind of naive optimism, but something maybe that Joanna Macy calls active hope. So the idea that actually there is a consequence to the actions and positions that we take in the present and how they manifest in the future.
Great. So we got the question from the audience. So the first question is, what directions do you think, and this is for the three of you, sustainable curating will go in the future? And this is for all, any of you want to take this on?
I can start with 3 simple experiences. One is sustainability starts with the circumstances of life and working of all the people who are we. So it means it starts with our own situation in an institution, in a network, in a social situation. So we have to ask colleagues and ourselves, where does it hurt and why? And I think this is a very first beginning. Second is that this question leads us straight to the market and to the power structures. So if you stop the air conditioning system of a museum, you have immediately a problem with all the people who lend you objects. And they have an enormous power. So you need to make a new form of contracts and agreement. And this is nothing that the people are willing to, because there's very often too much money in the process. So I learned that the artists are not the problem in the field of contemporary art, but very often the owners of the artworks and also the insurance system is a very heavy, straight force if you try to deal out new rules. And yeah, third thing is that it's related to different kind of marginalized knowledge, and to bring it into the game is a kind of a part of the answer. It's not our Western task to find solutions. Our task is to listen to other concepts. And for me, it means to develop an animistic concept of cosmos and Earth. And that is challenging for me. It's not only the question of what kind of materials and trips or travels we do. It's more. It's about consciousness.
Great. And unfortunately, we have time for only one question, which is so sad. And I think we're going to try to email you guys these questions and ask if you could spend a couple of minutes, and then we'll share with our audiences, because I hate to cut the Q&A short. This is for Farid. How does the Loom translate into curatorial practice? Is it an approach that we can call a collective model? And unfortunately, I'm going to ask you for a brief 60 seconds answer to that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I don't, because none of us actually like classically trained as a curator, so I don't know whether it could answer directly that question. But whether it's curatorial or artistic or creative or whatever, for us it's just like it's our agency, and then what we know is actually how to do things collectively. So we kind of like have to be honest with that, and then whether it's curatorial translation or not, maybe we can, it cannot be answered in very short way. But hopefully, what we can say is just like that also like that stability of positions of things in the art world, like what Thomas and Lucia was saying of like sustainability and resilience for whom can also be questioned by actually practicing. So it's not institutional critique, but institutional practice and institutional aesthetics, hopefully.
I love that. And I think we'll close on that, institutional practice versus institutional critique. I think that's food for thought for all of us. I couldn't be more grateful for your amazing inputs. And again, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you to all the audience for your insightful questions. And I will leave the floor now to Alfredo to move on to the next segments of our very dense program. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.